The machines in the hospital room hummed softly, filling the silence with a steady rhythm that sounded almost like breathing. Victor Marino lay completely still in the hospital bed, a ventilator tube resting near his mouth, wires stretching from his chest to blinking monitors beside him. His face looked pale under the cold hospital lights. To anyone who walked in, he looked like a man trapped somewhere deep inside a coma. But Victor Marino was awake. Every sound reached him clearly. Every footstep in the hallway. Every whisper near the door. And then the door opened. Soft footsteps entered the room. A woman. Victor could hear the faint squeak of a cleaning cart being pushed across the tile floor. A moment later, the cart stopped beside his bed. There was a quiet pause. Then the woman leaned closer. Victor could feel her presence near his shoulder. She spoke in a soft voice, the kind people use when they think someone might never hear them again. "You know," she whispered gently, "if you can actually hear me right now, you might be the only man in this room who's safe for pretending to be asleep." Victor's mind sharpened instantly. Her voice carried no fear, no hesitation, just quiet certainty. She studied his face for a moment. Then she added something that made Victor's heart beat a little slower. Because earlier tonight, 2 men stood right outside that door arguing about whether you'd still be breathing by morning. The ventilator continued its steady mechanical rhythm. Victor didn't move. He couldn't. The woman sighed softly. "I shouldn't even be in here," she murmured. "I'm just supposed to clean the room." Her voice lowered further. "But if they think you're unconscious, you might want to keep it that way." Victor waited for her to say more. The silence stretched for several seconds. Finally, she spoke again. "There's something else you should know," she whispered carefully. Victor's attention locked onto every word. "If those men find out you're awake—" She stopped. Her sentence hung unfinished in the quiet hospital room. Then she slowly stood up. "I guess it's not my place to get involved," she said softly. The cleaning cart squeaked again as she pushed it toward the door. And just like that, she left. The door closed quietly behind her. Victor Marino lay completely still. But inside his mind, a storm had begun to build. Because if what she said was true, the accident that brought him here might not have been an accident at all. And that night on the highway outside Chicago suddenly replayed in his memory. Before we begin this powerful story, welcome to Story Hut Africa, a place where stories reveal the quiet moments that can change lives forever. If you enjoy meaningful stories filled with emotion, unexpected twists, and lessons about humanity, go ahead and like this video and subscribe to Story Hut Africa so you never miss the next story waiting to be told. Now, take a deep breath and step into today's story. Rain had been falling heavily for hours. The highway outside the city was nearly empty, the dark asphalt reflecting the glow of streetlights like long streaks of liquid gold. Wind pushed sheets of rain across the road, making visibility worse with every passing mile. Inside a black luxury SUV, Victor Marino sat quietly in the back seat. He stared out the window, watching the blurred lights of distant buildings disappear behind them. Victor rarely traveled like this anymore. Not without protection. Not without multiple security vehicles surrounding him. But tonight had been different. Urgent, private, and strangely enough, rushed. His driver, Carlo, kept checking the rearview mirror every few seconds. Victor noticed immediately. "What is it?" Victor asked calmly. Carlo hesitated. "There's a truck behind us," he said carefully. Victor glanced toward the mirror. Through the rain, 2 headlights followed them at a steady distance. "Been there a while?" Victor asked. Carlo nodded slightly. "About 10 minutes." Victor leaned back in the seat. In his world, experience taught one simple rule. When something feels wrong, it usually is. The truck stayed behind them as they moved along the empty highway. 1 mile, 2 miles, 3. Then suddenly the truck's engine roared louder. Its headlights grew brighter. It was getting closer. Carlo frowned. "That's strange." The truck accelerated. Fast. Too fast for a rainy highway. Victor sat forward slightly. "Slow down," he said quietly. Carlo eased his foot off the gas. But the truck didn't slow down. Instead, it swerved violently into their lane. "What the—" Carlo shouted. The SUV's tires slid across the slick pavement. Carlo jerked the steering wheel to avoid the truck. The vehicle hydroplaned instantly. Everything happened in seconds. The SUV spun across the highway. Metal screamed against metal as it slammed into the guardrail. Glass shattered across the interior like exploding ice. Victor's head snapped sideways, crashing against the frame of the seat. The world flashed white, then black. When Victor's awareness returned, flashing lights surrounded him. Red, careful with his neck. Blue, rain tapping against metal. Let's move. Voices. Victor felt himself being lifted onto a stretcher. His body felt heavy, distant, like it didn't belong to him anymore. But then something caught his attention. 2 paramedics were speaking near the back of the ambulance. Check his wallet. A pause. Then one of them lowered his voice. Victor Marino? The second paramedic sounded surprised. Wait, that Victor Marino? Yeah, the one tied to those federal investigations. Victor's thoughts sharpened instantly. If his name spread right now, word would reach the wrong people very quickly. And in his world, injuries created opportunity. Opportunity for enemies. Opportunity for betrayal. Even people close to him might see weakness. Victor slowly let his eyes close again. When a paramedic leaned over him with a flashlight, Victor didn't react. He's out cold, the paramedic said. Possible coma. Victor remained perfectly still. That was exactly what he needed them to believe. By morning, Victor Marino was lying in a quiet ICU room inside one of Chicago's largest hospitals. Doctors studied his scans. Nurses adjusted machines. Charts moved from hand to hand. He's unresponsive, one doctor said. Could be a coma. Another shook his head. Or trauma shock. Hard to say yet. Victor heard every word, every conversation, every careless comment people made when they believed a patient couldn't hear them. Hospitals revealed a strange side of humanity. Nurses whispered about hospital politics. Doctors debated treatment costs. Administrators worried about insurance approvals. And Victor realized something unsettling. For the first time in decades, no one in the room feared him. To them, he was just another broken body on a hospital bed. Power meant nothing here. Money meant nothing here. Only survival mattered. And then later that night, the woman with the quiet voice returned. Angela Carter, early 30s, exhausted, wearing scrubs from the hospital cleaning crew. She entered quietly, pushing her cart. But this time, Victor knew she might be the only person in the building who understood something very dangerous. Because somewhere in the hospital, 2 men were waiting to see whether Victor Marino would ever wake up. And Angela Carter had just warned him, without even realizing who he really was. Victor Marino's eyes remained closed, but his senses were sharper than ever. The steady beep of the monitors, the faint hiss of the ventilator, even the subtle movements of the ceiling fan above. He registered everything. He wasn't unconscious. Not anymore. Every word, every sound, every whisper in this hospital was being absorbed. The first sharp tap of polished shoes on the tile outside made his pulse tighten. 2 men walked in, each dressed in tailored suits, their shoes clicking with authority. They carried themselves like they owned the world, or at least like they thought they did. They said he won't make it, the taller one whispered, leaning close to the bedside. If he dies, we control everything. Victor's body didn't move, but recognition hit him like an electric shock. He knew these voices. These weren't business partners. They were enemies, predators. And the realization was chilling. The accident that had landed him here may not have been random. Someone had wanted him vulnerable. Someone had wanted him dead. The men glanced at the monitors, whispered about insurance, made plans in hushed tones, and finally left, thinking their victim remained unconscious. But Victor had heard everything, every syllable, every sinister intent. His mind raced as the weight of the betrayal sank in. Night came again. The hospital corridors were quiet, almost eerily so, except for the faint clatter of a cleaning cart. Angela Carter appeared, her scrubs wrinkled, hair pulled back in a hasty bun. She leaned close to Victor's bed, her hands resting lightly on the edge. Her voice was soft, tired, but carrying the kind of honesty that could cut through stone. Victor noticed her hesitating as she spoke. She glanced at the monitors, then back at him, her brow furrowed. She realized something unusual, the slightest twitch in his heart rate in response to her words. Her eyes widened ever so slightly, suspicion flickering, but she said nothing. Instead, she continued talking, revealing more of herself than she ever had anyone. "I'm afraid," she whispered. "Afraid I'll lose my apartment if I can't keep both jobs going. Afraid my son won't make it if his treatment doesn't continue. Sometimes it feels like I'm drowning and no one notices." Victor listened silently, heart heavy in his chest. He realized something extraordinary. She was fighting harder than anyone he had ever known. No fear of money, power, or status. Just pure, desperate love and survival. He felt a pang in his chest, a strange, unfamiliar mixture of guilt and admiration. Days passed, and Victor began observing everything. Every whispered conversation, every small detail. The nurses who lingered too long, the visitors who avoided eye contact, the security guards who chatted casually by the entrance. He cataloged every movement, every word. Something was wrong. One of the doctors, someone he had trusted, might have been bribed. The thought made his stomach knot. Someone inside this hospital wanted him dead. And now he had proof, gathered quietly, patiently. Victor began plotting silently. No one suspected he was awake. Every step of his investigation happened in the shadows of the ICU. Every word spoken by staff became a piece of a larger puzzle. He didn't need to act yet. He just needed to wait and watch. Then the first attempt happened. Late one night, a nurse entered the room, carrying a tray with medication. Victor heard her whisper into her phone, the words ringing clearly in his mind. "Tonight." Something in the tone made Victor's pulse spike. He didn't move, but his mind worked furiously, calculating. He could hear her double-checking the dosage, her finger hovering nervously over the syringe. Something was wrong, very wrong. And then Angela arrived. She hadn't been expected. She moved quietly, almost instinctively, toward the bed, ready to talk as she always did. The nurse froze, her eyes widening. She glanced at the doorway, then at Victor's supposedly unconscious body. Without thinking, Angela spoke gently to him, oblivious of the danger in the room. The nurse panicked. Without another word, she grabbed the syringe and bolted, leaving the medication behind. Victor's heart thundered in his chest. And for the first time in days, he allowed himself to breathe a little easier. Angela had unknowingly saved his life. As the adrenaline subsided, Victor reflected on the precarious position he had been in. The accident, the whispered threats, the bribed doctor. Every event had been a test, and he had survived because he had stayed invisible. And yet, it wasn't brute force that had kept him alive. It was observation, patience, and the presence of someone honest, someone who spoke from the heart. Angela had unknowingly become his anchor. Her honesty, her love for her son, her courage in the face of fear. It had provided him with the clarity he needed to see the danger around him. Victor knew the path ahead would be treacherous. He would have to continue moving carefully, using every ounce of intelligence, patience, and observation to outmaneuver the people who had tried to end him. But for the first time in a long time, Victor Marino felt something else as well. Hope. Because survival wasn't just about power or fear. It was about noticing the people who mattered, listening to the truths whispered in the dark, and acting at the right moment. And now, Victor was awake. Victor Marino's eyes opened slowly, blinking against the harsh fluorescent lights of the ICU. The steady beep of the heart monitor seemed almost deafening, each pulse reminding him that he was alive. Nurses froze mid-step, their faces a mix of shock and disbelief. Doctors exchanged hurried glances, murmuring about miraculous recoveries. But Victor didn't care about their astonishment. His mind was focused on one thing, Angela. Her voice, her presence, the unwavering honesty she had shown him in the past days. She had no idea of the man she had been speaking to, yet she had risked her position to care for him, a stranger she believed might never speak again. And through her, Victor realized something that shook him deeper than any attack or betrayal. He had surrounded himself with people who only waited for him to fall. Power built on fear often leaves a man isolated. It leaves him vulnerable to betrayal. And in the sterile silence of the hospital, with his body still weak and fragile, Victor understood just how alone he truly was. His associates, those he had trusted with everything, were quietly plotting his funeral, unaware that he had heard whispers, movements, and conversations through the walls. He had spent decades demanding loyalty, instilling fear, and controlling every move in his empire, but fear was never true loyalty. Yet Angela had acted out of pure humanity. She hadn't needed to be there. She didn't stand to gain anything. She had come simply because she cared. That realization struck Victor like a jolt of clarity. He had survived not because of power or fear, but because of someone's courage, someone's willingness to act without expectation. Days passed slowly as he regained his strength. And then the moment came. Victor opened his eyes fully, and the room seemed to hold its breath. Nurses who had grown accustomed to the stillness of his comatose body froze, their pens and charts suspended in midair. Doctors whispered urgently to one another, trying to process the impossible. Yet Victor's thoughts were singular. He wanted to see Angela, to acknowledge her courage and confront the honesty that had changed his perspective entirely. When Angela arrived that morning, her steps were cautious. Her eyes were wide with apprehension, unsure whether she was walking into a miracle or a nightmare. Victor's gaze met hers, calm and steady, yet carrying a weight that made her falter. He spoke, and his voice was low, deliberate, impossible to ignore. "Thank you for talking to me. When you thought I couldn't hear you." Her eyes widened. She froze. Her heart skipped a beat as realization dawned slowly. Every word, every confession, every fear she had spoken aloud in the dead of night had reached him. Victor had heard everything. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Angela's mind raced. Had he been aware the entire time? Had her every whispered hope, her every fear, been laid bare to a man she thought was lost to unconsciousness? And yet, there was no anger in his eyes, no judgment, only awareness, only acknowledgement. Victor leaned back slightly, still weak but purposeful. "Your son," he asked softly. "How is he?" Angela's voice caught in her throat. She hadn't expected this, not from the man who had seemed so untouchable, so far removed from her world of struggle and uncertainty. She hesitated before explaining Marcus's condition, the treatments, the endless bills, the nights she stayed awake worrying he wouldn't survive. Each word seemed to resonate in Victor's chest, awakening a part of him he hadn't felt in years. Compassion, humility, and a desire to use his power differently. Days later, Angela received an anonymous message on her phone. It was brief, simple, and precise. Marcus's full treatment had been funded. The sender offered no name, no explanation, only the reassurance that her son would be cared for. Angela stared at the screen, tears forming in her eyes, a mixture of relief and awe coursing through her. She never knew who had made it happen, yet the kindness and magnitude of the gesture was undeniable. Victor Marino had not revealed his identity. He had chosen to act quietly, without fanfare, without recognition. His empire of fear could wait. In that moment, he understood the true power of influence, not intimidation, not wealth, not control, but quiet action, careful observation, and the courage to protect life without needing credit. In the sterile light of the hospital room, Victor reflected. The people he had feared, the rivals who had schemed, the associates who had planned his demise. They were irrelevant compared to what mattered. He had been reminded of something he had long forgotten. True power lies not in fear, but in the ability to act with humanity, silently and decisively, changing lives without anyone ever knowing. And as he watched Angela leave the room, smiling faintly, relief and exhaustion etched on her face, Victor knew he would carry this lesson with him forever. For the first time in decades, he was awake, not just in body, but in conscience. Power, he realized, was nothing without the courage to wield it wisely. Victor Marino leaned back in his private study, the quiet of his penthouse a stark contrast to the chaos that had once consumed him. But this calm wasn't idle. Behind the scenes, he was quietly moving pieces, observing, calculating. The attempted murder at the hospital had left scars, not on his body, but on his understanding of loyalty and betrayal. He didn't need to rush. His enemies had revealed themselves through arrogance, whispers, and the tiniest mistakes. One by one, corrupt partners who had plotted his downfall were quietly exposed. Bank transfers, secret phone calls, bribery, all documented and ready. He watched as internal betrayal collapsed under its own weight. A hospital staff member, someone he had once trusted unknowingly, was arrested for attempting to harm him. No spectacle, no headlines. Justice had happened silently, efficiently, and decisively. The lesson was clear. Real power didn't need a show. It was a quiet unraveling of corruption, the precise exposure of deceit, the subtle but permanent shift in control. Victor thought back to Angela Carter, the woman who had spoken to a man she believed could not hear her, who had risked her job, who had shared her fears and struggles so openly. It was her courage that had given him the clarity to act. He hadn't saved himself alone. Her honesty and compassion had guided him. Months passed. Life settled into an uneasy calm. Victor returned to his world of influence. But something fundamental had shifted. He no longer measured success by fear or wealth. He measured it by insight, by impact, by the lives he could quietly change without fanfare. Then one day, Angela received a letter in the mail. Its envelope was simple, unassuming. Inside, a neatly folded note and a small certificate revealed a scholarship fund for her son, Marcus. The letter carried only one line: "From someone who heard you when you thought no one was listening." Angela sat silently, tears welling in her eyes. Relief, awe, and gratitude collided all at once. She didn't need to know who had done it. The gesture spoke louder than any announcement, any recognition, any reward. Someone had acted with power, yes, but with humanity. Victor never claimed credit. He never announced himself. His influence remained, but the world didn't see it. Only Angela knew, though she didn't need to know the full truth, to feel its impact, the quiet power, the unseen justice, the invisible hand that had guided events from shadows, was enough. Victor reflected quietly in his penthouse that evening, looking out at the city lights. Power could corrupt. Power could isolate. But sometimes losing control or facing mortality reminded a person of what mattered most. Sometimes power changes people, he thought. But sometimes it takes losing power to remind someone what humanity sounds like. In the stillness, he smiled faintly. For the first time, Victor Marino understood that true strength wasn't the fear he commanded. It was in the lives he touched quietly, the justice done without spectacle, and the humanity preserved in the smallest, most unexpected moments. If this story touched your heart in any way, take a moment to like this video so more people can discover it. And I'd really love to hear from you. What part of the story stayed with you the most? Let me know in the comments. For more powerful and unforgettable stories like this, subscribe to Story Hut Africa and become part of our growing storytelling family. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you in the next story.